Hi, welcome back. Our previous lesson was on market demand. Today we'll be tackling shift in the demand curve. Buyers' best choice depend on many other factors beyond the price of a good. If any of these factors change, so might the buyer's demand decision. When this happens, the demand curve itself moves. This is called a shift in the demand curve or a change in demand. Now let's look at two examples of a shift in demand. The first is an increase in demand. If we start from an old demand curve, represented by this curve, if any other factor changes that causes the consumer to increase their demand for the good apart from the price of the good, then the demand curve is going to shift to the right to this new demand curve. So this will represent an increase in demand. Alternatively, if we start from an old demand curve represented by this curve, and any other factor changes that causes the consumer to decrease demand for the good, then the demand curve is going to shift to the left, moving us to a new demand curve represented by this curve. Now let's look at the factors that shift the demand curve. The first factor that shifts the demand curve is the income of the consumer. You have limited income to spend on several goods and services. Higher income implies you can afford to buy larger quantities of any good. At each price, you can buy larger quantities of apples, causing your demand curve to shift to the right if your income increases. If your demand for a good increases when your income is higher, we call it a normal good. So normal goods are goods in which your demand increases when your income increases and your demand decreases when your income decreases. If your demand for a good decreases as your income increases, we call it inferior goods. Inferior goods are goods in which your demand increases when your income decreases and your demand decreases as your income increases. Inferior goods doesn't necessarily mean the good is of lower quality. It simply describes a good for which demand decreases as income increases. Examples are goods that you fantasize to stop consuming when you start earning more income. So assuming you are a student right now and you are not earning any income until you take bus to school, and immediately you start to work and earn some money, you buy your own car. So a bus now becomes an inferior good because your demand for the bus will decrease even though your income has increased. The next factor that shifts the demand curve is your preferences. A change in preferences that makes one good or service more popular will shift the demand curve to the right. So if your preferences change in such a way that one good becomes more popular, your demand curve will shift to the right, which means you increase your demand for that good. But if your preferences change in such a way that another good becomes less popular to you, then your demand curve will shift to the left, which means a decrease in the demand for that good. Examples of these two cases are if you become a parent and prefer to drive more as compared to taking the bus, then your preferences for a car has increased. Your demand for car has increased because now you prefer a car as compared to a bus. And the second instance can be if you have concerns about your health, so you reduce demand for cigarettes. In this case, because of the concerns that you have for your health, cigarettes have become less popular or your preferences has reduced for cigarettes, so you demand less of cigarettes. Now, the third factor that shifts the demand curve is price of related good. Your demand choices are independent across goods. Your demand for, as example, hot dogs are closely related for your demand for hot dog buns. So if you increase your demand for hot dog, you also increase the demand for hot dog buns. Now, two goods are related in such a way that they can be substitute or complement. Complementary goods are goods that are consumed together. For example, hot dog and hot dog buns, or smartphone and a phone case. Substitutes are goods that are consumed in place of each other. For example, driving a car or taking a bus, or coffee and tea. When the price of one good changes, the demand for another good can increase or decrease depending on whether they are complement or substitutes. If they are substitutes, example, coffee and tea. If the price of coffee should go up, you will buy less of coffee, which means that you buy more of tea. So substitutes are positively related. The price of coffee and the demand for tea are positively related. If the price of a substitute goes up, the demand for the other good will go up. And this is the reverse for complements. If two goods are complements, example, smartphone or a phone case. If the price of a smartphone goes up, you buy less of it, so quantity will reduce. And because a smartphone and a phone case are usually used together, you buy less of the phone case. So the price of one good and the quantity demand of the other good are negatively related. If the price of a complement goes up, the quantity demand of the other good is going to go down. Now, the next factor that shifts demand is consumer expectation. As a consumer, you get to choose not only what to buy, but also when to buy it. If the price of, example, apples rise, and you believe that the rise in price is temporal, then you might put off buying apples for a few days, decreasing today's demand for apple. But alternatively, if the price of apple were to decrease, and you also believe that this decrease in price is temporal, then you might buy a large quantity of apple today so that you won't have to buy apples tomorrow when the prices increase. The next factor that shifts demand is the type and number of buyers. Generally, the greater the population, the greater the demand. Increase in share of population over 65, increased medical service, or the demand for care homes. An example, increase in birth rate will also increase infant supplies. So demand can shift as a result of changes in both the number and characteristics of buyers. When the number of people increase in an area, then the demand for that a good in that area can also increase. But when people are migrating for a certain area, the demand in that area will also decrease. So this is all we have on our lesson on shifts in the demand curve. Our next lesson is going to be on shift in the demand curve versus movement along the demand curve. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.